whether you're dating or in a marriage, and creating days apart, weeks apart? And has it ever become too long apart for a relationship to stay growing if it's months apart or something?
So the first question is, how important is distance in a relationship? I will also add something that I learned from the poet David Whyte this week when we had a conversation together, and he talked about the importance of silence in a relationship.
Not always having to speak, or...
Yes, or the importance of being able to be with yourself while being in the presence of the other.
What would that look like? Like reading a book and the person's in the room?
Could be that. Could be that you go away for a few weeks because you want to go do a meditation retreat or a project that you're interested in, or, you know, it's the notion that, or the fact that you keep certain things to yourself, but that you stay in dialogue with yourself, and a dialogue that isn't always shared with your partner.
When you mean silent with yourself, you mean like not speaking at all for part of this time?
Yes,
or you just mean
but
not...
you're taking it literally.
Yeah.
It's literally, but it's also the metaphor of it. So I'll explain the context. Our conversation was called, because that's your question about how important is distance. I would say distance is very important in a relationship. But the way I define it is this. Every relationship straddles freedom and commitment, togetherness and separateness, connection and independence. Every relationship. In every relationship, there is often one person who is more inclined to the connection and one person who is more inclined for the separateness. One person more afraid of losing the other and one person more afraid of losing themselves. One person more in touch with the fear of abandonment, one person more in touch with the fear of suffocation. We all have both, but we organize our relationship in which one of us will take on the role of this duality. But
and it might evolve seasonally too.
Completely.
Right? Yeah.
So we need connection and we need distance. We need the things that are joined and together, and we need the things that are separate. The separateness doesn't mean that there is deadness in the relationship. So when you ask how long can we be apart, it depends what you do with the space in between. If you keep the space in between alive, we are away, we have been together 5-6 years, and you have to go do a project and you're gone for 3 months. But during those 3 months, you have a whole letter writing experience where you are communicating in a very different way than the usual everyday communication. Every 2 days or so at night, you sit down and you write a letter, not just what you've done, the catch-up of the day, but then you create an aliveness to that space in between that can be even richer than when we are living together and we're standing in the kitchen every morning.
That's interesting. That's powerful, yeah. What would you say was the biggest challenge that you faced internally throughout relationships that you had to face yourself?
Oh, I think, you know, I met my husband, Jack, when I was 22.
You're what, you're 35 now?
Yes, I like it. And actually 35 years together, yes.
Oh, really? 35 years together?
Married.
Wow,
baby.
that's amazing.
No, we're together even more than that.
Wow, that's powerful.
You know, but I probably swallowed the romantic ideal quite a bit as a young girl too. Are you going to meet the right man with this man? If you meet the right person, you will never feel alone again. You will never feel lonely. You will never be sad. Seriously, you know, whatever you feel, you will feel again until some of it you may feel until you drop dead. But you will, if it changes, it's not because the magical potion of the other person is going to suddenly sprinkle its dust over you. So that was getting rid of some of the myths.
How long did it take for you internally to let that go or evolve or heal those myths?
Yeah, I would say the first decade. You know, it's slowly over time you begin to, you know, you begin to realize that I think, you know, I looked up to him. I still look up to him. He's a very smart guy. And I really wouldn't let any idea leave the house before it was vetted and approved by him.
Interesting.
Is this smart? Is this good? Can I publish this?
Getting approval.
Getting approval, from the mentor.
Interesting. That was the first 10 years.
Yeah, maybe a little bit less than 10, but well, certainly 5 years.
Okay.
Certainly 5
Interesting.
years. I really needed him to
Validate
to
or
check
to-
everything I would write and to validate and say it's good, because he had the PhD, I don't,
Interesting.
the whole. And then finally I was told one day, I have my own things to write.
He said that.
I'm not gonna be your professor.
I gotta work. Yeah. Wow.
And I was just like, who's gonna help me? Who's gonna help me? And beginning to write without depending on him that much was a major transition.
Mm-hmm.
Mating in Captivity was written completely on my own.
Without his approval of every chapter.
I had an editor that I hired who was phenomenal, but it was not an emotional dependency.
Mm-hmm.
It was a professional relationship. So that was a major transition.
Mm-hmm.
I think also understanding the difference between equality and equity.
What is the difference?
It's not 50-50.
The relationship is not.
No.
No relationship
No,
is.
it's 100-100. And complementarity. There are certain things that I will never do that I rely on him, and certain things that he will never do and he relies on me, and they balance each other out. And there's a fundamental sense of fairness, complementarity. If I want to go do something, it's just go do, enjoy, be the best, succeed, this complete generosity. And that generosity towards distance or freedom or individuality, this is a very important thing. So here's a question for you and for your listeners as well. Ask yourself, you can do it in relation to work, you can do it in relation to love. To me, that was a very important question. I understood early on that I needed freedom.
Mm-hmm.
No, I will put it differently. I could tolerate the lack of security better than I could tolerate the lack of freedom.
Uh-huh. You needed freedom.
I needed
more
freedom.
than security.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I understood early on that I'm going to be self-employed.
Uh-huh.
Meaning I can tolerate not knowing when the next check is going to come from, but I prefer that than somebody telling me when I can take a vacation.
And this was back in the 80s, right?
Yes, this is my 20s, early 20s.
Yeah, wow.
But then I applied it to relationship too.
Interesting.
I knew that I need to be with someone to whom I can say, go do your thing. And someone who says to me, go do your thing. More than someone who does this.
But back then, that wasn't really, thought of that much, was it? Or that wasn't really as acceptable, or maybe, I don't know, people didn't really think that way, or did they?
Look,
maybe in the U.S. it was different. But.
No, but you also need, the same way that I said to you, sexuality changes in a relationship when you have contraception. Mm-hmm. Well, freedom changes in a relationship when you have economic independence for women.
Interesting.
Otherwise, if the woman cannot conceive of her life separately from her partner,
then what happens?
At that time, primarily male partner, but I would say all partner, then you cannot talk about freedom. Because that means you can't leave. It means that you continuously depend on the person. And the law supported that. It's a legal issue. It's not just a psychological issue. Mm-hmm. Economic independence is an economic dependence on the part of women and mothers was legal.
Right.
It wasn't just a statement of her ambitions.
Interesting. Do you think more people are able and wanting to get divorces now because both parties have economic independence? And you don't need to stay because someone is providing or paying certain bills that you can provide for yourself in either party?
So divorce went up in the United States when women entered the workforce in a way that they could support themselves economically.
Was that
because the law changed?
Yeah. Was that because they were more independent financially, or because they were off doing other things and there were maybe distractions?
Because of economic independence, which would allow them, it's a few different things legally. It's alimony, so that children continue to be cared for,
right? And
she's not entirely responsible for them, or she doesn't lose them and they go with the father. So now we're in the reverse side, and the tension is on the other side. But it's a few pieces. It's being destitute. it's losing your children, it's not having anybody to care for you, and it's not being protected by the law. Those four things need to combine with having an economic independence that then allow you to not be destitute, be able to take care of your children, not rely on your partner in case they don't support you or can't support you, etc.
Yeah.
So that is the history of divorce. You can't separate the history of divorce from the economic changes and the legal changes around family policy.
How long do you think people should date before they get married to really know, like, if they're giving themselves the best chance for not divorce, let's say?
Depends how they date.
Interesting.
If their dating is a,
surface level.
Exactly, a parading of the best things of me, then it doesn't matter how long. It doesn't change.
Right.
But I would say that the most important pieces of dating, I think the dating is really bizarre at this moment because because you date and you date alone. You see the person alone. When in fact you learn so much more from seeing people in social situations.
Mm-hmm. I mean, with their friends or family.
Bring your person on date to people. You know what I did? I had a dinner at my house, and it was a bunch of single people. And then one of them at one point said, I actually need to, they were talking about relationships and long term and how do you know, all these questions that you're asking me. And at one point, one of them said, well, I actually need to go because I have a blind date. So I said, where are you going? Exactly. What are you going to go? To sit in a noisy bar where you can't hear each other? Bring them over. You'll know so much more. And anyway, she was really bold. She did it. The guy came too. So everybody doing their part. And there's about 12 of us there. And he shows up and we just tell him, we're in the middle of this conversation.
No, that's crazy.
And then but the point was, you know how much we learned about this guy? And she learned about him, but we all did too.
We learned a lot.
A lot.
Right.
Who he was and the family, where he's from, and he's thinking about couples and seriously,
And he was adventurous. He was willing to come and be a part of this experiment.
The whole thing. And I actually ran into this woman a few years later.
Were they still dating or no?
No, they didn't date, but she never forgot it. And neither did he, and neither did I.
Right.
Bring people you meet in your circle. First of all, your friends see things that you don't see.
Yeah.
And they often don't want to tell you, and they see it, and they know you. Second of all, you'll see how a person interacts with the social circle rather than, in this kind of dissociated space. So I think that this notion of we sit alone, and only later do we begin to introduce each other is...
Months later, right?
Later.
Let me introduce them now to the family. Let me introduce them after 6 months sometimes. And then I don't like this, this, and this, but now you're already developing something.
I asked my boys, I said, did your friends meet her? Who knows her?
No one.
You make sure why?
Expose them to people quickly.
Yes. And you don't have to go and get them checked. It's not that. You can go and go to a concert, share some activity together. But we learn about people not in a vacuum. We learn about people in social situations. You learn about people in how they treat the cab driver, the waiter, the dry cleaner,
everything.
the person on the street, the homeless person, the policeman, everybody. Just watch people in action. See how they relate to others while they're trying to be super nice to you. Mm-hmm. And that is a more precise piece of information than how long should we date.
Yes, that's powerful.
And you know that this is something that really is important to you. Being seen, being touched, being held, being kissed, being stroked, being made love to is really a language that is very important to you. And you don't want to live without it. Then listen to yourself. Mm-hmm. If it's not an important part for you,